Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. I just finished the interview with Dr. Marcus, who is a certified sex therapist and the clinical director of Mays Women's Sexual Health, one of the largest centers for women's sexual health in the country. Dr. Marcus wrote her dissertation on women and vibrator use while earning her Doctor of Philosophy in Human Sexuality from the Institute of Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. She also has a master's in public health from the same institution. She is a licensed social worker with a master's degree from Columbia University. I am going to put a disclaimer on this episode. If you have children, teens, this is not going to be an episode for them. So I would go ahead and shut that down and put your earbuds in or not have them listen to parts of this episode because we are talking about sex. Having said that, I think it's very important that you listen to this episode because she talks about how to talk to your children and teens about sex, to stop the shame cycle around sex. And you'll be interested to hear the data, the statistics on the people that don't talk to their children about sex and the people that do. So you're going to want to listen to this episode. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be uncomfortable at times. You may not even agree at times, and that's okay. She's just putting the information out there. So take a deep breath because sex is a hard topic to talk about. She also talks about fear around the coronavirus and kind of ways to deal with that. So I highly recommend this episode. I just want you to know that we've got to lean into the discomfort, breathe through it. So listen to the entire episode because she does give those statistics at the end of the episode. So it's important you listen to the whole episode. She gives some really great resources on some books on how to talk to children. And I think you'll get a lot out of it. Without further ado, here is my interview with Dr. Marcus about how to bring back intimacy to your relationship and get more comfortable with talking about sex and just leaning into that discomfort. Here it is. Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am so thrilled to have you on our show today. Would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners?
I'm Sheva Marcus. I'm the clinical director of Mays Women's Sexual Health. We are a practice that merges the medical, the physiological, and the psychological therapy. And because of that, we're able to really dive deep into a lot of women's issues, and we do great things. And it's a privilege for me to be able to work with women, but we have thousands of women patients coming through here. So yeah, that's kind of who I am, Kristen.
How did you get started in the field? I'm curious.
So, everybody asked me that question because I was in a different field first for many years. And then it's such a weird story, Kristen. I started working with the urologist who actually owns this practice. He does male sexual dysfunction. He's a urologist that does male sexual dysfunction. And I started working with him on a project of developing a laboratory. But I was always interested in the field of female sexual dysfunction. But the truth is the field of women sexual dysfunction never existed. Like it just didn't exist. And so 20 years ago, or maybe 22 years ago now, Viagra came on the market. Remember Viagra? Everybody's favorite drug. Anyway, so Viagra came on the market. And what happened, people don't realize kind of what was happening this behind the scenes, but there was a huge industry of specialists and physicians and researchers and drug companies trying to fix male sexual dysfunction. And then when they created Viagra, it was like 70% of male erection problems went away. And so, or didn't go away, but could be treated with a quick trip to your doctor. So they were like, oh my God, what are we all going to do now? The researchers, these practices. And they were like, oh, women, maybe it's not all in women's heads. Like maybe we could actually help women in some ways besides just through the therapy route. And I was in the practice at the time. And so I, together with Michael Warner, who was the urologist, opened Mays Women's Health. And we have nurse practitioners and we have therapists. And I'm such a big believer, Kristen, in the idea that things don't live in your head or your body. They live in a combination. And we're just understanding that so much now. So I feel like the best way to treat any problem that people have, any systemic problem, is to go at it from both directions. And so that's kind of what we do. And so anyway, I had come on to work with him on this other project, but then we opened the Women's Center and I went back and I already was a master's, I was already a master's in social, let me start that again. I was already a master's in social work and I had another master's in Jewish studies, but then I went back and got a master's in public health and ultimately a PhD as well in human sexuality. And I've just grown so much because it's a new field and we are really kind of just understanding all the complications of women's sexuality, but we've come so far in the last 20 years. That was a long answer to a very short question, Kristen. I am so sorry.
I love it. The more you share, the better. I think there's a lot of shame in this topic for women and men in particular too, that we don't really want to talk about it because we think there's something wrong with us.
If I had a nickel for every patient who said to me, am I normal? Everybody, it's amazing. Everybody comes in thinking that there's something wrong with them. I kind of knew that as I headed into the field, but now I don't even know what we've done to people to make them feel that way. And I think I sometimes wonder where that comes from. I think it comes from parents who maybe didn't mean to in any way pass along the sense of shame. It comes from the movies that show such a ridiculously idealized version of what sex looks like. And nobody fits into that. And we talk about women who don't fit into this idealized body. I think people who don't fit into this idealized sexual, model. So I think that shame is just, we are all so full of shame about it. And then also I think that sometimes things that are like normal and healthy, even in our current society, we've kind of shamed them. Like when people who are attracted to things that may be that feel a little bit more scary, like aggression or anger, but some of those things turn them on. That's okay as long as it stays within a certain realm. And people feel a lot of shame about that as well, like BDSM, stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you think some of that attraction can be rooted in trauma?
So I am not of the belief that that is the case, that attraction to, look, 50 Shades of Grey came out. How many million, 10 million women, 100 million? I don't even remember. Like those women are not all coming from trauma, or maybe they are. We all have some level of trauma. So it's hard for me to answer that question. But my approach with patients when they have interests that seem different are just to kind of figure out if it's doing anything bad in their life. If it is, then we need to kind of get at the root and uncover it. And if not, if it's just something that turns you on, that's okay. I'll give you one of my sort of favorite analogies. Like women always have really loved this, like being overpowered fantasy. You find it all the time. Like somebody takes them and just does what they will with them if you go into Harlequin romances. And that's kind of a horrifying thought to all of us. I cannot tell you how many women have shame about having that experience. And when I sit with them, we talk about the fact that when you have this fantasy, let's just be honest about it. You are creating the person who's overpowering you. You are making that person look exactly the way that you want them to look. You are having them say exactly what you want them to say. You are having them not say everything you do not want them to say. You are having them stop doing whatever it is they're doing, like a puppet on a string. So like who actually has control in that situation? Like you have 100% control. Just because you have a fantasy that's like that does not mean you want anything like that to happen in reality. So does that make sense, Kristen, what I'm saying?
Because I do think a lot of people have this fantasy life as escapism and it's not rooted in reality. So how do you help people distinguish the two?
Well, what's crazy to me is that we as a society have even merged those two. Like, can we not experience the fact living in fantasy, or not living in fantasy, but experiencing fantasy is just this fun, wonderful way to be in the world without actually doing something. Like fantasy and reality are not the same thing. Where did we even get the idea that they are merged? I feel like that, talk about trauma, like that feels traumatic to me, that somehow held responsible that we have in our fantasies what we really wanted to happen. That is just not the case. When we talk about shame, women come in and they're like, oh my God, I love fantasizing about other women, but I'm not a lesbian. And what does that say? And I'm like, it says that you like fantasizing about other women. It doesn't say you're a lesbian. It doesn't at all. If you're fantasizing about monkeys and, a Martian and a trip to the moon, like all it means is that for some reason that works in your brain. And so we have to stop being ashamed of our fantasies. And I think part of that is recognizing how separate the fantasies are from the reality. And that the whole joy of a fantasy is that you can go anywhere and do anything you want to do in your brain without really having to want it to happen in your real life. I want on Instagram, I have this whole thing I do, Fantasy Friday. And I try really hard to help women learn how to fantasize and not feel shame about their fantasies. Because I feel like we are just told to feel shame about so much of our sexual reality. And if you can learn to live in the joy of fantasy and not have it wreak havoc with your reality, because it isn't reality. So does that make sense, Kristen?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think where couples get hung up is they come in and pornography has played a role in the males or females, it doesn't matter, fantasy, and then they want to recreate something that someone doesn't feel comfortable with,
Right. So
someone's not okay with.
yes, Kristen, fantasy and reality are separate things. And when I talk about fantasy, I'm talking about what's happening in your head. And different people, yes, where people get tripped up is how much fantasy do they want to recreate in their relationship? And how comfortable are people recreating in their relationship? And that really takes, as you know, because you do so much on communication, you know, some serious communication between partners to kind of understand, here are my hard lines. This is what I don't want to do. This sounds a little scary or in kind of confusing to me, but maybe we could try it. And I'm always encouraging people if they're comfortable or even a little uncomfortable is not bad for sex. A little uncomfortable is not terrible. And you're with a partner that you love and you trust, then try something. If you don't like it, don't do it after that. Or you might find that you find something new that you didn't know that you like, or you might just make your partner feel happy. And if you're not unhappy and you're okay with it, that's not terrible. Or probably you might end up just laughing. And laughter is a big piece of sex also. So you'll just have had a new experience. But yes, you never want to push anybody to doing something because it's their fantasy. And I'll say something else. You never have to share your fantasy with anybody. It's your fantasy. You are allowed to own your fantasies. And you can have certain fantasies that you may want to share with your partner. That might be fun. And you can absolutely have fantasies that just live in your own brain. And that's all they are. They're your fantasies.
And I find sometimes that I have some folks that they're so mired in the fantasy that they hide and then they do things behind people's backs, their partner's backs, and try to recreate that fantasy and they hide it.
And do you find, Kristen, because what sometimes I find if they can talk about it, if they can bring it out into the world and just discuss it with either you, a therapist, or with their partner, sometimes they don't have to actually do the fantasy. Just talking about the fantasy can be fun. In general, in life, I have discovered, as I'm sure you have, is that shame lives in those dark places. But as soon as you pull something out to the light of day, somehow never feels quite as shameful. Right? You know what I mean? It just doesn't.
Absolutely. I am huge in telling the truth that will set you free because you're bringing it to the light. Just like what you said, when you leave it in the dark, it grows.
Correct.
And it causes havoc.
Right.
When you have a safe environment to bring it to the light, it can transform and free us.
I mean, I think that is the truth for everything, but even more than anything, when it comes to sex. I feel like as soon as people start talking to me, I'll give you an example. It's almost amusing that they feel like the way they orgasm is bad. There are women who are concerned that they orgasm on their stomach, right? And there's a lot of women like that. And again, you don't see that in movies, right? If I tell you the women who come in as if they have this deep, dark secret and we're working and we're talking and we're talking and they don't want to tell me and they're thinking about it, and finally they say, I have an orgasm on my stomach. But Kristen, I don't have data because there's no data on this. I think a third of women to a quarter of women orgasm on their stomach, using their hands on their stomach. And the shame. And I'm seriously? I mean, that's not what I say to the patient, but I'm saying to you, this is what we have to feel shamed about. There's so many things in this world and you're feeling ashamed that you have an orgasm on your stomach. Let's talk about how normal that is, how natural that is, how fine that is. And the only way you might want to change that is if it's somehow you feel like it's hard to have sex with another person and have an orgasm that way, or maybe you're just having trouble telling them. Anyway, I know I got sidetracked, but yes.
No, that's great. And I think one of the things on this subject is people get so uncomfortable.
Yes.
They are so uncomfortable. In couples therapy, it has to be brought to light. And individual therapy, I mean, the subject,
Yes.
people are so uncomfortable. Talk about that, how uncomfortable it is. Even listening to this, people are probably uncomfortable.
Yes.
Some people, right?
Yes, Kristen. No, I'm sure. And I feel like I get it, but I also see with my patients, as soon as the shame thing again, as soon as it comes to light and you start talking about it, I just got a message yesterday on social media from this woman who said she had come here and we had helped her treat her vaginismus, her vaginal pain. But she said, I'm still having problems having an orgasm. And I said, did you discuss it with your therapist? And she's been in therapy for I don't know how long, and she has not raised it with her therapist. And I'm thinking to myself, that would surprise me, except I cannot tell you how often I see couples and they come in. I see a woman and she's been in therapy for a year and they haven't had sex in a year or 2 years or 3 years. And I'll be like, what does your couples counselor say about this? And she'll be like, never came up. And I'm always in shock. The couples counselor, worth their salt, needs to be asking how your sex life is because it's a piece of everything else. I guess what I'm saying to your listeners is sometimes even your doctors and your therapists may be uncomfortable. We're not used to talking about sex, but it gets easier. It just gets easier. I talk to parents about talking to their kids about sex, and the parents will say, oh, we're really comfortable talking about our kids' our sex. If it comes up, we talk about it. And I'll be like, okay, well, how many of you have actually had conversations with your kids about sex? And then there's total silence in the room. And then somebody brave will raise their hand and say, well, they didn't ask. I laugh because your kids are not going to bring up sex unless it's a part of the conversation because they're going to pick up on the fact that it's not talked about. So if you want to stop that cycle of shame about sex, you got to start talking about sex. And I always say to parents, start when they're really little. Start with books. There are books for 4-year-olds. There's books for 7-year-olds. There are books for 12-year-olds. If you start looking for it, there are endless places to have conversations about sex. And if you want to stop that shame cycle, the way to stop it is by forcing yourself to kind of get past it. And the younger the child, the easier. But if your kid's older, do it with an older kid. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the same way nutrition, you would not sit down with your 12-year-old and say, now I'm going to give you a lecture on what you should eat that's healthy or not. You build it into your life with your kids when you're at the food shopping, when you're making dinner, when you see things on television. You have constant conversations. And that is how to have conversations about sex with your kids so that they won't be ashamed and won't pass this along to the next generation.
I ask clients, now, how did your parents talk to you about sex? And their eyes get big and they're like, never would my parent ever talk to me about sex. And they get so scared and they go into freeze. They're like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. So how would you help someone take a deep breath, regulate themselves? Because they're like, I don't even know how to go about the conversation. That's why books are wonderful, I think. How would you coach someone to start a conversation, let's say with a young person?
Like a 5-year-old?
Yeah.
Okay, because it's much easier. So I would say for sure, if you can start younger, because you're lucky enough to have done this when your kids are younger, start when they're younger, because whatever gaffes you make, you'll be able to laugh about it. So that's number one. And for the record, my parents never talked to me about sex. They were the worst. Some point, that's just...
So you never got talked about sex?
No. And I had to figure everything out for myself and did it quite clumsily, I may add, which probably makes me very well suited for this job. I would 100% say books. There's a series by Robbie Harris, by far my favorite book for kids. And again, there are books for 4-year-olds and over, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds. There's a wonderful book out there. I always joke that the only thing I hate about this book is that I didn't write it. And that's called Everything You Never Wanted Your Kids to Know About Sex, but Were Afraid They'd Ask. And
I like that title.
Isn't that great?
Say the title again.
Everything You Never Wanted Your Children to Know About Sex, but Were Afraid They'd Ask.
Oh, I love it.
And I think they're super helpful. That book is an amazing book. I say to parents, pull out a book and sit and read with your child. Before you do that, in the shower, say penis, vagina, vulva, orgasm. Just say those words. And if you have an older kid, you can practice those words also. You want to be able to say them so they sort of trip off your tongue. Practice with your partner if you have one. Practice with your best friend. Seriously, the more you have these conversations, the less it starts feeling like a big deal. I mean, you know that as a therapist, right? Like the more you have these conversations, people say to me, how do people talk to you comfortably? And I say, I think people are so comfortable talking to me about this stuff because I'm so comfortable. You could be talking about, the piece of paper on the desk. So I want you as parents to be just as comfortable. And the only way to do that is to practice. And to practice and laugh. Laughter is always good with your partner, with your friend. Say the words, have conversations, talk about it. And then if you have books, bring out books. If you see something on television, bring out television. If you have teenagers now, I highly recommend you do it either in the car or when you're cooking, when you're not having eye contact. It's much easier for you and for them when you start those conversations. they may say, la, 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 I don't want to hear this, mom.
Ew.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't matter. They're hearing you. I promise you, they're hearing you. And it will come back to make things better for everybody, for all of us.
How did you get more comfortable? Because this is just, you're centered in it. It flows through you. How did you get from our parents never talked about it to I'm now 100% comfortable with it?
That is such a great question, Kristen. And I think about that a little bit, but I had a story. The New York Times did a profile on my work because I work a lot with ultra Orthodox patients also, as I'm an Orthodox Jew. So it makes me able to do that. And so they thought it was interesting and they did a profile on that. And one of the stories I told them was the story that I've always thought about. And this was a story that gave me so much shame. I mean, so much shame. And it wasn't until later when I started talking about it. Now I can laugh about it. So I was my first year of college. I was young. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia. I knew nothing about sex. And worse, I knew that I knew nothing about sex. I felt like everybody around me seemed to know what they were doing and I didn't. So in retrospect, I realized nobody knew what they were doing. But then it felt like I was this kid who came out of the sheltered environment, Jewish schools, knew nothing about sex. And I walked into the union building and some young woman approached me and said she's doing a research project. And could I help her with her research project? And I said, sure. And she said, I'm going to say words to you. And I don't know if she told me they were sexual words or not, but I'm going to say words to you. And then I want you to tell me the word you use for that. So for example, she would say penis and I could say dick or cock or any of those kind of words, right? So I'm like, my eyes got big. I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know anything about any of this stuff. Like I was like petrified and I was like, okay, Batsheva, calm down. Whatever she says, if you don't like, if she says penis, you can say penis. I use the word penis. Like you just repeat back what she says and you'll be fine. So she does. She says penis. She says vagina. I don't even remember, but I do know that she said mammary gland. And I was totally frozen. And of course I knew that was breast, but I couldn't think. I was so frozen. So I said mammary gland. And she was like, what? You use that word? And I was like a deer in headlights. I said to her, oh yes, I went to a very scientific high school. I think she finished up the interview. That was the end of the thing. And then I made a beeline out there. I didn't go back to that student union building for like, I think 3 months. And I was so humiliated. And years later, I remember telling my husband, maybe not years, but a while later. And then I told another friend and people just started laughing. And as soon as people started laughing, I started realizing like, it's fine, Batsheva. So you were scared and you didn't know that. That is a very telling story.
Wow. So then how did you get more comfortable? That was like forcing you into acknowledging the terms. Then how did you get more comfortable over time? I guess is the question. Because people are so uncomfortable.
I was so conscious, Kristen. I was so unconscious. I was so conscious of the fact that I had terrible sex education, that this kind of story could happen to me. And in the Orthodox community, there's just no information, which is true about a lot of religious communities. And so I made myself start learning stuff. I read everything I get my hands on. I talked to friends about it. There are specific laws about menstruation in the Orthodox Jewish community. And I was adamant about talking to other women about it. And I think I just slowly got comfortable with it enough so that when I decided to go into this field, I mean, I still had work to do. Like, when I did back my master's, my PhD, I'm sure I was still one of the most sheltered people in the room, but like, it's exactly the advice I'm giving your listeners. You just do it. You just sort of jump in, but you try to talk about things and say things in a safe environment. And if that's by yourself in your room, that's okay. And if that's with somebody that you like and you love and you trust and will laugh, that's fine. And slowly over time, you'll get more and more comfortable saying what you need to say.
Yeah. So it's just really facing it and leaning into it and
right in a gentle way. Yes.
Talking about it with someone safe.
Exactly. And I wouldn't suggest a public speech on it to start with, but yes, exactly. So lean into it, but lean into it like very gradually and slowly. And I promise you, you'll be amazed at how quickly things change.
Yeah, I agree. I think the other thing that I hear with women is I don't have a sex drive like my husband wants to or my whomever. I just don't feel like it. I don't have the energy. And so I'm sure you hear this a lot. So what is your response for that?
I hear that all the time. Yes. Okay. So that's a very complicated question, Kristen, and not one I could possibly answer in time of this podcast. I could give you a 3-hour lecture. I think a few things are going on. And I am writing a book, which hopefully, assuming this coronavirus ends and there's still a world and people are still reading, it should come out next March. It will be called Sex Points. And the idea is that women have to start understanding that, like every other part in your life, your desire is a mix of your physiology, like your physical stuff, and your mental work that you're doing. And so that means that hormones could be a huge, huge piece of this. And I think women don't take into account enough how hormone drops as they get older, and that we think men is needing testosterone, but women actually need it also. It makes a very big difference. So that's a piece of it. We can go back to the beginning of this interview, which when I talked about fantasizing and being able to move into your head and being able to do new and different. Eroticism does not like sameness. Eroticism does not like repetition. For most people, new, that's why relationships are better early on. It's new, it's erotic. So you can't always do that if you're in a long-term monogamous relationship and you want to keep it close. So then the issue will be you have to do it in your brain, either sharing things with your partner or not sharing things with your partner. Like thing just going into your head. Like I don't think women realize how much disuse of your part of your brain that fantasizes gets in the way. Like you have to practice that. So you have to learn how to fantasize. You have to look at your hormone levels. You have to look at how to fantasize. You have to look at your other medications and make sure they're not getting in the way. You have to look at what you can add that may be new and different in the relationship, which I'm sure you've talked about because a lot of therapists do that. That's the whole idea of the sex points. The question is like, where do you get points from? There's so many places you can get points from. It's a project, but it is, I promise you, it's doable.
Yeah. And talk about body shame as it relates to sex, because that can kill somebody's sex drive immediately, feeling not good enough. I have two questions on this. So the body shame I see a lot of. They feel like they're
Sure.
too fat. They feel like their boobs aren't right. I mean, we could go on and on. So how do you help people through that?
So there's a thin line between general women's body shame, which most women walk around with, body dysmorphia, where women really have a distorted view of their body and can't get past it. So body dysmorphia is really its own animal, and there's specialists who really work on that. But let's just talk about the classic women who feel like they gained 5 pounds and just hate how they feel. So I think often a lot of the talk that we do has to do with trying to move outside themselves. How do their partners feel about this? And in 99% of my cases, the women are like, oh my God, he loves my body. He's totally fine with my body. He thinks my body is awesome. It's me that's stuck on those 5 pounds. And trying to sort of let people cognitively understand what they may be doing with this and how they're putting concerns about their body, which may even be representing other concerns, sort of front and center when it doesn't really need to be. So that's what I do from their head perspective. You know what I mean? Like trying to kind of work through, what is this really about? Is this really about those 5 pounds? Or is this really about something else? So that's the first conversation. The second conversation is, what can we play with to make this feel less scary to you? And that may be the lights. It might be what you wear. It might be, again, moving into your head a little bit more. It might be watching some erotic videos or porn videos that have women that are heavier that actually you think are beautiful. Some of it's sort of shifting our perspective as well. So those would be some sort of action items that I would put out there.
How about performance anxiety? I see more of it in men. There are women
Yes.
that also feel the same
Oh my
way, but
God.
it's a performance anxiety, and that can really shut it down.
You know what's so funny about the confluence of questions you just asked? I always say the analogy for women and their weight is men and their penis. Do you know what I mean? Like men, they're so obsessed with their penis and how well the penis performs. And women are all obsessed about their bodies and their weight. It's unbelievable. It just, you see that across the board. So for men, I say, and the truth is we have an amazing male therapist, sex therapist here. And he's always talking about getting men to stop thinking about intercourse. Like, let's just stop thinking about intercourse because that's where the penis is so scary to them, right? Let's start thinking about playing. Like, what feels good? Let's talk about erotic massage and let's talk about using your mouth and your hands and your 10 fingers and your 10 toes and the other parts of your body. Let's pull intercourse off the table a little bit and see what happens. And so often that anxiety goes away. And some of this is also a conversation with their partner. When the partners come in and the husband's like, I'm so afraid my penis isn't going to stay hard. And then the therapist says, how much does it matter to you? Let's say he uses his hand or his mouth or his a vibrator on you. And you have this amazing orgasm and everything feels great. Do you care if his penis stays hard? Like the women don't care so much about that. Some women do. And I'm not suggesting that it's okay to go forever with a limp penis. But this penis fixation, both the size and the erection, is very heavily tilted towards the men and how they feel about themselves. It really is equivalent to that 5 pounds on the women.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Let's talk about fear. We have the coronavirus right now, where many of us are in isolation. You and I both kind of have
Yes.
pared it down. We're in a teletherapy situation right now. And fear and anxiety is running rampant. And we know when it comes to health, people have a lot of fear. Let's talk about how to work through fear.
That's a tough one. I think the most important thing, if anybody's listening to this during the crisis, is you have to listen to your healthcare providers and you really should follow whatever guidelines they give you. That having been said, most of us are with intimate partners or with partners who we see regularly. And for the most part, the guidelines are really trying to keep you isolated, but within a small group. So, like if you're 2 people living together or 4 people living together, assuming nobody's showing any signs of actual active disease state, you can be with that person. And there's no reason you can't be with that person sexually. I mean, once you're kissing that person, you might as well be having full on sex with that person. So I think people really need to realize that. If anybody actually is having symptoms, then that's a time to kind of pull back. And if you're in a different position right now, you're dating, you're online, this might be a time to start thinking about doing some like online checking things out, meeting some new people, but maybe not going out and hooking up with people. This is not, I think, time to do it. I actually saw a tweet this morning. I was laughing. My son forwarded this tweet to me, which I just thought was so great. It's from a scientist, Susanna L. Harris. And she wrote, I keep getting people asking me if the coronavirus can be spread through sexual contact, even if there's no exchange of air or touching of faces. And she says, if you can get this accomplished from 6 feet away, congratulations to both of you. I think it's reasonable to be fearful, but you don't go crazy. This doesn't mean you can't be having sex with your partner. As a matter of fact, now you're at home. It might be, and you're not tired. This may be a great time to have sex with your partner. I hope that a little bit addresses that question.
Yeah. Is there anything you would say about women's health in the fear with the coronavirus right now?
So I would say really do the things that you should generally be doing, like use condoms, like you have smart sex, have safer sex. Like that is what you need to be doing. Wash your hands a lot. I wouldn't think this would be a great time to start having multiple partners, like going out and dating and hooking up. This is just not ideal for that. But for women who are in steady relationships, try not to be scared because sex is actually one of the few things you can do. And, you can't go out of your house. So you might as well try to have some fun in the bedroom. This might be a time to order some toys, order some vibrators, try something out because Lord knows we're not going to the theater and we're not going to the movies. So I was joking with somebody that 9 months is going to be a group of babies born, and we call them baby Zoomers.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. It's true.
So
what do you think are the biggest blocks to people really leaning into the discomfort of sex in the conversation and trying new things? What do you think is the biggest block?
Okay, that's a great question, Kristen. I think it makes people uncomfortable. And I think what people don't realize is that discomfort is not a bad thing for sex. A lot of discomfort is bad, but a little discomfort, like sex at its best, is often a little bit edgy, a little bit exploratory, a little bit unknown. Again, when you think about early relationships, often the sex is the best then. And that's when we don't know the person so well. And we're a little bit uncomfortable, we're a little scared, but it makes sex better and more fun. And I think if people kind of understood that, they would be maybe more willing to try things. So if I have a woman and, let's say she has orgasms quite easily on her own using her hand, but she doesn't have them from intercourse, which is true about 70% of women, just so we have that stat, right? So I'll say to her, well, when you're having sex with your husband, do you ever reach down and you touch your own clitoris? And I'll get the stare like, oh my God. And now people listening may say, okay, that's not like bringing whips and chains into a relationship. That is just reaching down and touching your own clitoris. And they'll be like, oh my God, I think I'd feel so embarrassed. And I'm saying, let's talk about what it would feel like to lean into some of that embarrassment. Maybe the embarrassment is good. I'm sure you were a little embarrassed when you first started dating too, and he saw you naked. You know what I mean? Like maybe we need to sort of reclaim some of that little bits of like discomfort's okay. Discomfort's actually not a bad thing. Discomfort, a little scared, you order this new kind of, lingerie and you're like, oh my God, I've been sleeping in flannel for 20 years. What's my husband going to think when he shows up and I'm wearing this teddy? You know what I mean? And so women are scared. They're embarrassed and they're afraid. what's he going to think of me? Like, oh, I've been married to this person for 20 years and now she shows up in a black teddy. That's great. Both the fact that you're scared and the fact that you're taking him by surprise. You want to be a little uncomfortable. This love affair our society has with intimacy and everything being verbal and everybody being 100% comfortable with each other is great, but it doesn't work great for sex. So we need to realize, like I was saying before, when I was talking about fantasies, sometimes things may feel a little discomforting, and that's okay. Can you breathe your way through that and actually use it to your benefit? Because life's not all supposed to be totally calm 100% of the time. I feel a little stupid saying that during the coronavirus when we're all walking around like stressed out all the time. But this is the reverse. I feel like with sex, we have to be willing to put in a little bit of a little edginess.
And I'm wondering too, this is what I find is cultural messages that they've got, right? Religious messages about good and bad, being the
Yes.
good girl versus the bad girl versus
Yes.
this is disgraceful. This is not okay. And so
yes.
it's very
Slutty. Yes. Slutty. Yes.
it's very confusing. So the fear around being perceived as trashy or whatever the word they want to say, or not, it's not okay in God's
Yes.
eyes, or there's a lot of messaging around that. How do you work with people around that?
I think you're totally right. Every religion is different. And so I have to work with different religions because of different messages. But in general, one of the themes often is in most religions, long-term monogamous loving relationships are kind of critical. They want families. And so the discussion becomes, if you're using these tools to help you have what God wants from you, then isn't that ultimately an amazing thing? Maybe you feel like God doesn't want you to use these words like street slang for sex on the phone. But maybe in the confines of your house with your husband, when it turns him on, or with your wife, if it turns her on, or if it turns you on, forget what turns them on, maybe that's fine because what you're doing is furthering the goal that really we want to further in the world. So I try to sort of separate out the messages as we originally heard them from sort of the subtext of them and try to get let people sort of separate out those things to understand that this stuff is actually quite important to do if it makes the reality better. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think emotional connection really plays into the sex life. So I work a ton on that emotional connection for the women to then feel safe enough to explore.
Yes, exactly.
And work through their shame and their fears of rejection, or they're not going to be liked, or whatever the fear is.
Right. Or their husband will think they're like different than what they married. And yes. And you have to feel safe in a relationship in order to experiment with those other parts of yourself. But then experimenting with those other parts of yourself is so important because safety isn't sexy necessarily. I don't want that to be taken out of context. Safety in a sexual relationship is everything. But emotionally, you want to feel like there's some excitement so it's a very fine dance that we're doing.
It is. And I find any romantic relationship needs emotional safety to then have explore. And so I think that's an important piece that I work on.
Yes.
Really being able to acknowledge someone else's feelings.
Yes.
Understand them, provide empathy and compassion.
Right.
Process through it so they can feel more comfortable.
Yes, exactly. I think that's
explore some of these things. Yeah. As a takeaway, what would you say to folks that are like, I am not comfortable with sex. I am scared to even talk about it with my kids. I'm scared to even face it myself. What would be some takeaways? One, we said books. Two would be to start just naming the body parts even.
Yes.
In your shower with a friend. What else can people do?
So if you're in therapy, I feel like this is a really good thing to bring up. And if you feel like your therapist is not comfortable, then that is very telling and you need to do something about it. But find a therapist who is comfortable to talk these things through with, because you'll find like once you get started, you won't want to stop. That's a relationship that should be at its core the most comfortable and the most non-judgmental. And that's a really, really good way to start. I also think like maybe go back to your stash of movies that turned you on that you liked when you were younger and watch them and sort of see if they still turn you on. I'm a big believer in like learning how to fantasize. And the best way to do that, I think, would be to find short stories and figure out what turns you on and maybe start sharing them with your partner. I use short stories in order have women sort of identify those elements that turn them on. And then I want them to learn how to build that in their brain. But conversations with their friends or their spouse could be so helpful once you've sort of read these short stories. And then I'll say, like, identify what makes you feel sexy. If that's, you want to buy a sexy nightgown, well, not for your husband, you're buying it because it makes you feel sexy. Does lying in the bath and having candles around you make you feel sexy? I have a friend who says getting her toenails done works really well for her. Like, the trick is to really stop and slowly identify, like, what are the things that make you feel sexy? And then talk about them when you can and just be there with them and let some of this stuff like permeate your brain. Because in the end, as soon as you start waking up that erotic part of your brain, it kind of wants to get out. And if it doesn't, then you need to have your testosterone checked.
Yes. And the last question I have is on masturbation, because we have some that it can get kind of addictive because it can be a release and then it impacts the sex life
For men.
for
Sorry,
men in
men.
particular, and some women too. I think it can go both ways.
Both ways. Okay, that's so interesting. I have never had a woman who masturbated to the detriment of her relationship. I'm sure that exists because everything exists. I just haven't personally seen it. We do see it sometimes with men. And that goes with that porn question again. Those are the complicated questions. So masturbation in general, I think is super important. Like, I'm always talking to teenage girls, like especially for young women, to learn what turns them on, what feels good. I just can't even stress enough how important it is. Having said that, if somebody feels like they're masturbating and it's getting in the way of their life in some way, either men or women, then again, I would highly recommend you reach out to a therapist to talk about this. Like, I think that is, you're not crazy. People do use it as a stress reliever, and a good therapist is going to focus less on the sexual part of it and the stress part of it. Like, what is the anxiety? Like, some people drink too much when they have anxiety, and some people pop pills when they have anxiety, and some people eat too much when they have anxiety, and some people, like me, talk too much and do too much when they have anxiety. And some people masturbate when they have anxiety. And that's fine. Let's just try to see if we can identify what the anxiety is and see what happens to the masturbation as a result of that.
I like how you just said I talk to teenage girls, women, young women about masturbation. How do you talk to them about that? I'm curious.
Once in a while, I don't do it a lot. I just don't have time. I go into schools. I get pulled into Jewish schools to talk to the teenagers. So I will say to them, you need to learn your body. Like, the most important thing about sex is pleasure, and you need to learn your body. And the best way to learn your body is to touch your body, take a mirror, look through your body parts. You have to know what they look like the same way your ear and your nose and your mouth, and you need to know what they look like. You also have to know what feels good. And the best way for you to find out is for you to be touching yourself. And I'll tell you a great story. I was talking to like 10th, 11th, and 12th graders once, and this girl heard me. She raised her hand. She goes, "Oh my God, it sounds like you think we should be masturbating." And I was like, "I do think you should be masturbating." And then she said, "Well, I need to tell you that the worst insult the boys in the school can fling at you is you are so hard up that you're masturbate. The worst insult that the boys at school can fling at us is you're so hard up, you masturbate." And I just started laughing. And I said, "Well, the next time anybody says that, say, you should only be so lucky as to get to be with a girl who masturbates, because they have more fun and know what turns them on." And there was like total silence, and then everybody started laughing. So that's how I talk to teenagers. I mean, I think teenagers, like, if any message comes out, talk to your teenagers, tell them masturbating is good and fine. Those are the women who have the better sex lives in the end.
It's so interesting you say that, because the parents get so afraid to say that. They're like, I'm giving them permission to be sexual. And what if they go out and be promiscuous? They get afraid to have that conversation.
I think that has to do also with parents being afraid to talk about sex. But if it makes anybody listening feel better, this has been well studied, and every single study on the subject shows that the more kids know about sex, the later they start acting on it and the more responsible they are about it. There's no studies that suggest that keeping information keeps them from thinking about it, knowing it. So if that makes parents feel better, you're doing your kids a huge service if you can talk about it.
I love that. And on that is where we're going to end, because that was wonderful information. Because the data says they're less likely to go out and be promiscuous if you talk about it.
And they'll have safer sex.
They'll have safer sex.
Yes. And that's what we want.
They have the information.
And they're not curious. They're not going out and they're not going out and doing crazy things in order to get the information. And it also helps. The other thing I will say about this is that talking about porn is very important because trust me, your kids have a phone, they're going to see porn. And so if you're having ongoing conversations where you talk about why porn isn't realistic and like learning how to have sex with porn is kind of like learning how to drive by watching the Fast and the Furious. It doesn't work that way, right? When parents have those conversations, then it makes all the difference. We can't keep our kids from this stuff, but we can infuse the way they approach it with our values and our information. And that's the best way to protect your kids.
Absolutely. I also think if anybody listening has had any sexual abuse, please go see a therapist. Because
Yes.
that has to be worked through. On previous episodes, I've talked about EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, to address that. I think that has to be looked at when we're talking about women's health and sexuality in general. I think it's important we don't keep that hidden. People say, I'll go to the grave and I'll never say anything. And I'm like, and that will torture you for the rest of your life. You will not see relief in your connections, in your romantic relationships, and your friendships. It has to be addressed. So I do want to say that.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to what you were saying before about the fact that when something lives deep and dark in the recesses, it just grows and touches everything. And if you take it out the light of day and talk about it, that's when you can let it go.
And you can free yourself. You can
Yes.
free yourself from the shame, the fear, the entrapment of it. So I encourage anybody listening, if that is the case, you are supported in this. There are resources available. If you go to the emdria.org website to look for a therapist, I highly recommend that. And that will help you break the legacy, break the generational pattern of sex being shameful. When we work on our own stuff, that clears the way for our children.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Where can people find you? If they're like, oh, I really like this. I liked all the information you shared. How can they find you?
Okay, so you can always follow me at Dr. Batsheva. So it's, Dr. Dr. Batsheva, Batsheva. I know it's a hard name. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Maze Women's Health, where I'm the director of. We also are on Instagram and Facebook. That's Maze Women's Health. And hopefully there'll be a book out next year and you can have me back on to talk about the book.
I would love to. Yes, go follow her. I will also have that in the show notes. So anybody that's wants to have your information, it'll be in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for your time. We could have talked for hours about this subject.
It was totally my pleasure, and we should get a glass of wine and do it another Zoom conference for a few hours.
Thank you. And I'm thinking about you during the coronavirus, to everybody that's listening. And take your deep breaths, center yourself. This too shall pass. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, Boice.com. Thanks and have a great day.